Welcome back to the Corner of Story and Game, the podcast where storytelling and game design meet. Today, we're scaling narrative heights with a guest who brings both mechanical mastery and creative longevity to the table. Matt Forbeck is an award-winning novelist, game designer, and the lead writer behind the Marvel Multiverse role-playing game. From penning tie-in novels for Halo and Minecraft, to crafting tabletop systems for supers and shooters alike, Matt's career is a masterclass in bending mechanics to serve story. Our focus today is how power rank and leveling systems inside of tabletop role-playing games and the prose that is used to teach those systems can inspire adaptive narrative on-ramps for video games. So let's get into it. Matt, thank you for joining me.
Woohoo, I'm back again.
Excellent. You're tied back up with Jim now, so you guys are tied in the head of the pack.
Is this Zub we're talking about or some other Jim?
No, it's Zub. He's the only.
There we go.
He's the only Jim in the world.
Yeah, must be nice. I saw Jim at Origins actually. I was just there this last weekend, so we had beers in the Char Bar, which is a dive bar across the street from the convention center. So it's good to catch up on him.
The two of you do. Oh, I mean, this is not the topic of the day, but the two of you do a lot of conventions. The only other person I know is Richard Dansky, who also bounces around a lot. But you guys do.
Rich doesn't work. No, Rich does a boatload of conventions. He's got a little more free time these days than he had in the past when he was working full time for Red Storm, etc. But last year was kind of nuts. I don't try to do conventions a ton of the time. I do a few regular ones, but then when the Marvel game came out, suddenly people are like, "Hey, you're back doing games. You should come see us." Usually for me, it's GaryCon, Gen Con, and Gamehole Con because two of those are in Wisconsin, and Gen Con I never miss. This will be my 43rd Gen Con in a row, right? So they kind of launched me into loving all this stuff, and I just never had the heart to break up with it because it's so amazing. So.
There you go. Okay, well, the topic of the day that we're going to talk about today is power rank systems within tabletop role-playing games, the prose that's used to explain those and convey that information, and then what we can learn from that might be applicable to narrative design and video game writing and creating an experience inside of that space we can learn from this. But before we dig into it, I do like to do the origin story. You've been here enough times, people can go back and listen, but I don't know. What are you up to these days? Catch me up. Well, but what's going on?
Oh, man. Okay. So for those of you who are just starting out here, I'm Matt Forbeck. I started on tabletop games. I did novels. I did comic books. I do toy design. I do video game writing. I do all sorts of different things. I've done installations for museums, whatever interactive fiction. If it involves a story, I like it. I'm happy to be involved in it. If your grocery list involves a story, I'll write your grocery list for you. So, and they're very revealing sometimes, so that's okay. So mostly in the last few years, last 10 years or so, it's been mostly video game work, and then getting back into tie-in novels and tabletop games, right? So I was working on things like I was a story doctor in Assassin's Creed Origins. I was the lead writer on a game called Biomutant. I was co-lead writer on Hard West 2. These are all video games. And then I do a bunch of tie-in novels, like I wrote Halo novels and Minecraft novels. And we have, for current stuff, for instance, we have a Minecraft interactive game book coming out from my son and I, who's 26 years old, Marty, who's joined me in the family business. And that'll be on July 7th, I think, somewhere around there. But it's like those old fighting fantasy game books where you actually have interactive fiction. You get to certain points, you have to break out the dice and, run yourself through a solo battle. And if you win, you go this way. If you die, you go that way. So, and then for the last 3-4 years, I've been the lead writer for the Marvel Multiverse role-playing game, which is a tabletop role-playing game like Dungeons and Dragons, published by Marvel Comics, actually. So it's not a license. I get to work directly with folks there, and that's been a lot of fun too.
Nice. Okay, well, that's a perfect entry into the topic because it's a lot, right? It's a lot.
Feels like a lot.
Let's use the Marvel Multiverse role-playing game and the design work you've done there as our entry point. So
sure.
I want to talk today about, and I should have mentioned this before, we're trying to keep the episodes a little shorter this season, so we're going to move a little faster and be a little more on point as opposed to how we used to ramble for 2.5 hours.
Good luck to both of us.
Yeah, exactly. Just means I edit more. But the topic is power ranking or leveling, even if you want to call it that, systems within tabletop role-playing games and how we explain them and how we build them. So let's start with why don't you set the stage for me? Outline that system within the Marvel Multiverse role-playing game.
Right. I mean, this stuff goes back to Dungeons and Dragons and even Bronstein before that. And the idea that you would have levels and you gain experience, you move your way up through ranks. Um, Often it wasn't tied directly to a story, right? I mean, it was tied coincidentally to a story in that once you went up a rank or a level or whatever, the game master would then say, "Ooh, now you're ready for tougher people to fight," right? But in a lot of ways, it wasn't a whole lot of story to it. So the Marvel role-playing game in the playtest edition, we had like 25 or 30 stories. We actually had 30 only published, or I'm sorry, ranks. Uh, but we only published 25, thinking 30 is going to be overwhelming. And then my co-designer, Mike Capps, had to leave the project. So I ended up taking over. We basically stripped the game to the studs and rebuilt it, right? So the currently now the game has 6 ranks. One of the reasons is it's a D6 system. So if you move things down to 6s, a lot of things make more sense. You're much more simple. Also, the granularity for superheroes doesn't necessarily have to be spectacular. Just steal one from Spider-Man. It's the difference between Spider-Man and Miles Morales might be too sharp, but the difference between Spider-Man and Wolverine as far as power levels might not be. So ranks and levels, whatever, are generally supposed to be a rough guide to your powers, the amount of power that you have, whether that's expressed as uh, character abilities or things they've done or powers that they have or anything like that. Now, superhero games are a little bit more interesting in that sense, right? Because superheroes don't have your traditional fantasy progression where you're like, you're the farm boy and you work your way up to a rookie soldier and then a veteran soldier. And then eventually you're taking over kingdoms and you become the king and you're a conqueror and all that. The general Conan story that a lot of people follow from A to B or Z as the case is. And a lot of D&D is modeled on that kind of thing. The trick, of course, is that most people playing Dungeons and Dragons, I'm just using it as a model because that's the most popular role-playing game in the world, does a good job, and also the first big one. A lot of people never get out of like the, past 5th level or whatever. Their campaign peters out, or the game master decides that this is way too complicated to deal with people who have wish spells and can teleport everywhere and all this kind of stuff, right? So, with superhero games, the real trick is that you don't have that kind of narrative advancement, right? When Spider-Man gets his powers, he's a teenager for a while, and he's like, tripping around trying to figure things out. He's building his web shooter, stuff like that. But then he pretty much has the same powers and abilities from there on out, right? He's not doing anything new. He's not, becoming smarter, richer, faster, stronger, or whatever. He is who he is, right? And that doesn't detract from the stories he's telling. The stories are really about heroism, not about advancement. So there's a different impetus for them. But of course, because it's role-playing games and because we've been trained by D&D and video games and everything else, people like to have advancement. It makes them feel like they're accomplishing something. Often it mirrors their own advancement into the game, right? If you start out as a rookie or as a rank 1 character or level 1 character, you don't have to learn too much, right? You can learn just a few things. You can learn the basic die mechanic and the powers and abilities that your character has at a very low level, which means there's limited choices. And then you can work your way up into it as you go. So by the time you're, top level, top rank, then you might have, 30 different things you can do, but you can work your way up to that, right? So it works pretty nicely that way. But for superheroes, again, they can go off and have adventures. They do it to save people. They do it for, altruistic motives often, as opposed to so they can conquer nations and increase their horde or get more magic items or whatever. So for the Marvel game, we actually have what we call a rank cap, right? So if you're Spider-Man, for instance, you have a rank cap of 4 if you're Peter Parker, right? And the reason being that we also tied the ranks to like the kinds of adventures you're going to have. And they are done that way in D&D, although not spelled out as explicitly. So if you're fighting at rank 1, you're like, street level person, right? You're like, guy who just ties on a mask and starts beating up muggers, maybe a beat cop if you're lucky. Rank 2 is like Daredevil, some powers, maybe some martial arts, but nothing too serious. Rank 3 is like Miles Morales, which are, lower rank characters or lower power characters, but they're maybe moving up, right? Then you have Peter Parker at rank 4 and Wolverine and a bunch of other characters. Rank 5 is fairly powerful, but it's like Thor on a bad day, when his dad's still in charge and everything's going on. and rank 6 is Captain Marvel on a good day, right? So, and then we have rank X above that, which is like, yeah, too powerful to put stats on. It's Infinity and Galactus and
Right.
all these characters that you really shouldn't be getting into a fist fight or anything else with. Um, so we have a rank cap. Let's say, for instance, if you're Spider-Man, you probably want to have adventures that will encompass New York City or maybe go, nationwide, right? If you're rank 5, that's more of a global thing. If you're rank 6, it's more of a cosmic thing, right? If you're rank 1, you're probably dealing with your school or your neighborhood or whatever. Um, so since we know Spider-Man sometimes gets involved in, national stuff and often is his friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, it goes from rank 1, 2, 3, 4. We cap him at rank 4. Now that means he never gains any more powers. If you're still playing, if you pick up and play the characters, that's another thing. A lot of the characters are pre-built in the Marvel game. You're not coming up with your own one and advancing them. You can do that. But if you're saying, I want to play Wolverine, you just grab Wolverine, right? And then you're not like, and now I'm, super Wolverine or whatever. Yeah. So it gets a little bit tricky that way. So we put it on rank cap that says, once you reach this point, you just stop, right? Now, we did have a lot of people say, but what do I do now? I'm like, well, you play the game, guys. You have stories. It's not that hard. But people like to be able to have new fun things to do with their characters too. So when we did the Spider-Verse supplement, which came out, I think in March, we added a new thing called stunts, which is something I actually stole from a role-playing game I did back in 1999, a super dystopian game called Brave New World for Pinnacle Entertainment way back in the day. And the idea was, once you reached a certain level, you didn't actually gain new powers, but you might learn how to do cool new things with those powers, right? So, Spider-Man now, and some of these we swipe from the video games, right? So Spider-Man can now, web a gun, grab it, whip it around, and hit you with it, as opposed to just grabbing the gun, right? And there's different bonuses you can get, all sorts of stuff. The new Avengers book coming out in September will have stunts for a lot more different people. Like Hulk is not just strong and vicious, but now you can do the thunderclap that knocks people over.
Yeah.
It's using his super strength in a slightly different way, right? So we try to give people on some options because they enjoy that thing. But again, in superheroes, you can start out your origin story at rank 1 and work your way up, but usually you stop once you get there. Sometimes you're like, well, actually, now I want to go play cosmic stuff, and then I'm like, okay, we're going to put you in a Hulkbuster Iron Man suit and go off and do that kind of stuff. But that's it was a lot of a struggle because it's even the original 1984 Marvel's game had advancements, right? And I'm like, well, that doesn't really fit the tropes and the feel of the game and the feel of the properties, right? That's what we're trying to mimic there. So when people step in to this game from, say, Marvel movies or Marvel comics or whatever, video games even, they don't go, hey, why is it like that? That doesn't make any sense. Why am I now, rank 20 Spider-Man? Shouldn't he already be rank 20, So
One of my primary questions and concerns, I suppose, would have been, for right or wrong, we traditionally fall back on that leveling system as a way to structure story arcs. And this arc needs to end here, and we should have a big arc that's going to end around 15 to 20. And I was wondering, how would you manage it when you're locked in certain ranks? And you've answered the question, but that's brilliant.
yeah, I mean, the trick, of course, is that in stories other than D&D, you fall back, you fail, right? I mean, things happen, your powers are lost, you lose your tools. We actually have stuff in that in the game where it's like, if you need to rank up for a short period, like I mentioned, you do go get that Hulkbuster armor, or you get your Spider-Verse copy of Mjolnir and then go off and do that. Or you get the Iron Spider armor that Spider-Man had for a while, right?
Yeah.
The thing is, though, that you notice that those continue for an arc. It's usually a writer does this. They power them up for something, and then when they're done and another writer takes over, they lose all that stuff. They revert back to their original form, right? Yeah. And so we do have some bits in the game about how to do that for the character and how to increase them temporarily. But the general rule in tie-in fiction or any kind of writing where you're borrowing somebody else's toys to play with is that you get to take the toys off the shelf, play around with them as much as you want, do crazy things with them, but then you have to put them back in roughly the same shape that you found them so that the next person can play with those toys as well. Sometimes you get larger arcs where things happen and things develop, but generally speaking, that's how you do things. And Marvel's it's a wonderful setting. I love it to death. I really do. I've been reading it since I was a kid. But there's things like the fact that time in Marvel moves a lot more slowly than it does in the real world. And it's not anchored to the past, but anchored to the present, which is even crazier, right? So,
Yeah. It's so cool. I love it. Okay, let's move to the part talking about how you explain, because I mean, you just explained fantastically. But when you're writing this stuff, you've said you're on record as saying that a rule book should not only educate, it should also entertain. So the question is, how do you turn something that's crunchy in math and Excel spreadsheets into something that reads like a comic book with catchphrases and action?
well, I think you can go overboard in any direction, right? I mean, I've seen people try to do role playing games as comic books with dialogue balloons and all the 9 yards. It gets kishy pretty quickly, and there's a reason we do these things in text usually, as opposed to doing them with pictures and dialogue balloons and whatever. You can do it, but actually, a rule book generally has to serve three different purposes, right? One is as an education tool; you have to teach somebody how to play the game. Two is to be entertained, like you say, because obviously a lot of people don't actually end up playing the games. They buy them, they read them, they fantasize about finding a large group of friends in a weekly game that they can play. But sometimes you don't have the friends, sometimes you don't have the time, sometimes you have neither. Life gets in the way, or whatever. Yeah. It's hard to get together a long running campaign. Um, so a lot of people buy them just to read them. So they have to be fun to read, or at least comprehensible. You're not just shoving a textbook in your head. And the third thing you need is, if you actually are playing the game, they have to serve as a reference book, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not just you learn this here. Now you need to know where to go look up that rule and have it easily digestible in small chunks, because you're not going to bother with the context that came in the rest of the chapter about that. You just want that bullet point that explains that one thing you're thinking about, you've kind of remembered, and that's where you went, right? So rule books have a lot going on in them. They're actually one of the most challenging kinds of technical writing that you can pull off because of the different demands. I find that the entertainment part, the color part, should be treated like seasoning, right? And the primary job of game is to be used honestly, as a reference book, right? Because a lot of times people already know the game, they teach it to their friends. A lot of people never open the book, the book of any game if they're playing it. Somebody at the table has read the book, figured it out by teaching it to themselves, whoever the great alpha gamer in the group is, and then they go and teach it to all their friends. But then they need to be able to refer back to it, and their friends need to be able to refer back to it. Most of them are never going to read the whole thing through, right? So first you need to be able to have it be a reference book. Then you need to be able to have something that teaches that eager gamer, that game master or whatever, how to play the game, so they feel comfortable introducing it to their friends. And then the spice there is the color, right? Like when we did Deadlands, I can't tell you, we had this guy called the Prospector who was kind of a narrator for the game. You go, yeehaw, guys, come on in here. Let me tell you a few things, right? Have that nice little Southern drawl or Western drawl going on. And we knew how to do it really well. Everybody who wrote stuff to us the first time would do like every sentence in an entire chapter would have prospector speak. And honestly, it gets dead thin real quick. So the answer was, if you had a section, you got one sentence of prospector speak up front, and that was it, right? Because it set the tone, and then the rest of it was just regular writing. You can be conversational and not too dry either way. I mean, that's a matter of how you're setting your style as well. But we would set the tone within one sentence, explain the rule, have an example, and then you move on to the next thing. And those are really the three things you want to do in any section of a role-playing book: is set the tone, the example, or set the tone, rule, and example. And people would just write it like it was your your hillbilly uncle was explaining the whole game to you the whole time. I'm like, no, 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 no. I mean, flavor is great, but too much of it chokes you. It's like having an entire dish made out of salt. It just, salt's good in small doses, right? It gets its flavor, whatever, but not a meal. You're not going to sit there just suck on rock salt the entire time, which is what it really feels like. So,
Gotcha. Is there space, in your opinion, to lore drop, to world build? I'm not talking about source books. I'm talking about rule books and explanations to set the tone, to start building that space.
I mean, for instance, when you start doing examples, we don't just say generic hero A or Billy or Susie or whatever or Amir. We say Hulk, Spider-Man, whatever, right? Now in the Marvel game's easy because it's one of the most popular brands in the world. So if you don't know who Hulk or Spider-Man is, you're probably, I don't know how you get the book, right? But, even then we can say, like when I was doing the Brave New World game or the Deadlands game, or when I was working at all these other things, you'd say, in this character who is this, this, and this, does this, right? And then the neat thing is you can actually, I've done this before, use that main character as your example character throughout the entire book and the people that they interact with and which. So you actually are telling a backup kind of story in it. I did a book called, how was it? Sages and Specialists for second edition Dungeons and Dragons back in the 90s. And it was off. I mean, um, the book actually turned out well. I get lots of compliments to this day, but the brief was awful. The brief was come up with 12 characters that nobody is ever going to want to play, 12 character classes, and then, do all the character class rules and everything else for them, right? And there were things like the blacksmith, or the apothecary, or the cartographer, things that are useful to an adventurer, but what you would never want to play because you want to play the thief, the fighter, whatever, the wizard. So, yeah, in each one of these sections, there was, I think, 10 of them in the 128-page book. So we had to have 12 pages on each one of these useless kinds of characters. So we let off with a full-page splash as art, and I wrote a full-page short story that told about the character, your generic character that I'd come up with as a stand-in, going and talking to each one of these people. And then there's like a story that I actually developed over all 12 chapters. Or 10 chapters. So by the time you got you're like, okay, I can see what's happening here. What's going to happen next? That's up to you, dear player. You get to figure this out, right? And we also came up with a system whereas as you went up in rank, your ancillary buddies here would also go up in rank, right? So if you meet them and you're a rank 3 wizard and you find a rank 3 or level 3 apothecary, you're like, okay. And by the time you're level 5, then your apothecary gets to move up a little bit too. So, because, at that point you need more powerful things that you're tapping them for. So
Right.
it worked out pretty well. But I remember Keith Strom, who was one of the people working at Wizards on 3rd edition, came to me and said, we will never ask you or anybody else to ever write a book like that ever again. Thank you. I mean, it was good. It came out well, but it was not great fun to write.
That's hilarious. I think I remember playing at least 3 of them at one point or another.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it sold well. People liked it. I think it was a good addition to the game. But it's one of those, like, okay, this is really dull, so we got to figure out a way to make it interesting. And they say there are no dull topics, only dull writers, right? Some topics are still easier than others.
Amen. Okay, well, let's take that idea and kind of bring this whole thing to a close. What can we learn from that process, from the leveling systems, the rules, and then the onboarding, and apply it to video game writing, narrative design, and the onboarding process, teaching rules in a video game with narrative? Because that's a very focused little piece of the dev cycle, is that onboarding window and how we teach and set the stage.
Yeah, it can be difficult. I mean, one of the ways it can be troublesome is that if you're throwing people in at the bottom, you'll see a lot of games now that will start out with like, this is the main big bad guy. Like it was one of the like Jedi Survivor games, right? And you play Darth Vader coming out just to start out because one, he's an iconic character, and two, you get to have really powerful stuff, right? And the reason is because if you have to wait to be able to do anything cool and powerful, and you don't know what the hell that's going to be, it can be dull. It can be, you may give up and say, oh, geez, I don't know if this is going to be worth it. But if you get to play Darth Vader for 10 minutes at the start of the game, and then you start out as Kai or whoever they got, Cal, and have to work your way up from nothing to a point where you might be able to challenge him, then it gets much more interesting. Maybe I'm in the games. It was one of the early first person Star Wars games anyway.
Yeah.
But the idea being that, show people what they can do when they get to the end of the game. And so you're foreshadowing what's going to be happening with them as well, even if they're playing a different character at the time. Because again, say, okay, now I get to play the first 3 hours as a pig farmer's son. It's like, that's maybe not as exciting as you want it to be. And, also, but there's, we do narrative, we do advancement in superhero games and video games. Cause if you go to play the Spider-Man games, there's advancement, right? There's things like, but most of it's like, I gained this new equipment and now I'm learning how to use the equipment better. Or I have webs and all this stuff, but now I'm learning how to use my webs better. And that's kind of where the stunts idea comes from, where you're not gaining brand new powers most of the time, but you're getting new ways to use the powers or technology that you've acquired better. Right.
Right.
And the interesting challenge for designing stuff for that is that people make different choices, and they're all not, if you design it so they can't have everything at the end of the game, right? They can't max everything out. Then you actually don't know which model of that character is going to be playing those final battles. So you have to make those final battles winnable theoretically by every one of those combinations, and that can be kind of a challenge too.
Right. What do you think is the biggest challenge of making the narrative match that mechanical onboarding? How do you tell a story, or at least set the stage for a story, while you're teaching at that beginning part?
Right. I mean, one of the ways we do it in the Marvel game is that there's full character creation rules in it too, right? So, I mean, nobody goes back and says, "Now I want to play Spider-Man from his origin." You might want to play him in high school or whatever, but you want to play him at his most powerful usually. But if you're a new character, we have a system that starts with choosing your origin, which determines what kinds of powers you have, and choosing your profession, which says the kind of things you do when you're not being a superhero, right? Usually, sometimes you're being a superhero as well. And that kind of onboards you as far as getting you in the right frame of mind of who you are and what you're doing, and the fact you don't have very many powers yet, but there's an open window ahead of you to move into those things, right? But the other option is like, nope, I'm just here at a one shot at a convention. I'm playing Black Panther, damn it, or Storm, or Kamala Khan, or whatever you want to play. And that's great. You can just do that. Now the onboarding there has pretty much been done for you by decades of comics and books and films and television shows and everything else. So you don't have to teach people as much. When you're doing original stuff, it becomes much more difficult. But the flip side is it's easier to teach or to show people Marvel stuff, but then they come to with a whole set of expectations you have to fulfill too.
Right.
And that can be tricky. The number of people who argue with me over the different profiles that we've done for Marvel characters is stunning, right? They're like, "Well, isn't he like this?" I'm like, you know what? Go back and read every appearance of that character. I guarantee you they change a lot. The Stan Lee Daredevil was very different from the Frank Miller Daredevil, from the Brian Bendis Daredevil, from the Chip Zdarsky Daredevil, etc. It's Matt Fraction. All these guys who have written it over decades do it slightly differently, right? And trying to emulate that in a game can be tricky. But the best part of that is we gave you the character creation rules. So if you want to do your own version, go right ahead. But actually applaud that. That's kind of cool.
You throw the television series in there as well, and there's a whole lot of
exactly. Exactly. Yeah, people are like, "Oh, come on, but Charlie Cox is so cool. He's got to be like rank 3 or 4." I'm like, one, we need some more rank 2 characters just because we have a bell curve of example characters. But 2 is, I mean, he's a blind guy who's got powers that make him less blindish. And he's a great martial artist, right? But, is he going to stand up against Spider-Man or Wolverine?
Yeah.
It's just not the same thing. So part of that is just being cold about the calculations. And of course, ranking characters is always hard because so much of it has to do with the circumstances. But on the other hand, it's hard to do with role-playing games. And that's one of the reasons, like even Wizards of the Coast and Dungeons and Dragons, they have this thing called a challenge rating for their different monsters or encounters or whatever. Still, 50 years after the game has been produced, have not cracked that nut, with a team of the best designers in the world throwing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars at it, have not cracked well, if you're doing this guy, then you should have these, this many people fighting in a point system that works it out. There's too many circumstantial differences from table to table to really make that efficient, right? You can put a rough guess in there, but the rough guesses aren't really much more than that. Kind of like, that looks good.
Just go back over history and collect all the different times they've done stats for Durden.
Exactly.
Compare them. Yeah, it's crazy.
No, it's nuts.
Well, my friend, that's the core. That's the stuff I wanted to learn from you today, and that is
it's so short compared to what we've done. I don't know what to tell you.
We're not quite done yet.
Okay, very good. All right.
I do have that little philosophical question that you've already answered a couple times, so I had to come up with a new one just for you. So I got a new philosophical question for you.
Oh dear.
So, it seems, in my opinion anyways, in every culture, there's people who just are compelled to tell stories. Like it's a survival trait. It's just something they have to do. Why do you think there are certain people that are driven to spin tales, and what keeps that fire burning for you? Like, obviously you're one of them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, bluntly, the reason I tell stories most of the time is to make money, because I feed my wife and my kids and put the roof over my house and all that kind of stuff with it. But the trick is, even if I wasn't being paid, I'd probably still do it, right? And I still do it for free all the time. The reason is that stories help us figure out how the world works, how we put ourselves in the proper context. The stories are about the world and who we are and how we fit into it. And how you can always tell how people's personal philosophies are by how a story works, right? Are they actually generally positive people? Are they cynical people? Whatever. You can tell by the kinds of stories they gravitate to, and the kinds of stories that they like to tell. Yeah, but if you put me in a bar with a beer in my hand, you're going to have a story come out of me at some point fairly quickly, because it's just fun to do. I enjoy doing those kind of things. It's a great way to pass time. But again, it helps you understand. Uh, the funny part is the stories I tell change over the years. Like stories I told when I was a teenager or in college, looking back now, I'm like, oh yeah, those were pretty brutal. I told them as funny stories, but in essence, they're actually about trauma. So what I've been doing is processing that the entire time. That kind of wisdom comes to you a little later in life, usually. Um, but I think that a lot of stories are processing those things. You're trying to figure out, how did all that happen? What came together? What was really going on there? And that teaches you how you might think about things in your present or in the future, right? And then these are stories you tell to other people to help them figure out those things, which is one of the reasons they like to listen to, right? The contract you have when you're a storyteller and a listener is that I'm going to tell you something that's worth your time to listen to, right? There's a plot to it. There's a point to it. I have some friends who are absolutely awful storytellers. They will just tell you, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. I'm like, that's not a story. That's not even a good news report, right? It's just a sequence of events that happen to occur. There's no sense of meaning or through line or plot to any of that. And you start nodding off. You're like, okay, that sounds great. I don't know why you keep telling me this shit. Uh, but if you're a storyteller and you like doing this, one of the key things, one of the reasons I work in all these different fields is because I love telling stories. That's the core bit of all of it, right? So if you figure out how to tell stories and you love it, then the rest of it's just formatting. You're figuring out how different industries do this stuff, or the right way to relay those stories in those industries, the kind of tools that you have. But the core of it all is just learning how to tell a story that captivates people and entertains. I mean, if you look at somebody, you're telling a story, and you can see them lean in like this, like, what's next? Oh my God, that's the best thing. Exactly.
This is why I love having you on the show, Matt.
But again, I'm telling stories. This is what I like to do too. So
All right, my friend, we're going to start heading for the door. I do like to open up a little space for signal boosting. What are you working on? What's coming out? What's came out? Hit me with it.
right. Well, go to forbeck.com, FORBECK.com if you want to know more about me. I'm on most of the socials, although I've kind of pushed Twitter into the trash bin lately. So for reasons. Um, if you start talking to me, you'll find out where I lie pretty easily, but I'm not going to.
Right there with you.
Anyway.
Right there with you.
And so the latest things we had come out where we had the Marvel Multiverse Spider-Verse Sourcebook out in March. We have another one coming out in September for the Avengers. If you want to see me this summer, I'm going to be at Gen Con. I'm not going to be at Comic-Con for the first time in a few years because last year they moved it 1 week closer to Gen Con and I went. And honestly, by the end of the 2 weeks, I had COVID and I was dying, tired. And I'm like, I don't want to go to Comic-Con, catch COVID, and then have to blow Gen Con. So,
right.
So rather than put myself through all that, I'm like, if you absolutely don't need me there, I'm going to give it a miss and take the time back at home. But you can find me at Gen Con, which I never miss because that's like part of my person and my personnel, my identity is. I mean, actually, I have some friends call me the mayor of Gen Con, right? I'm like, okay,
I have heard that investor Gen Con. That's how I was.
yeah, exactly, right? And that's something I'm like it. You don't call yourself that. If you're lucky, people get to call you that. But because I've been doing it for so long and I run the Diana Jones Award there. So people should also pay attention to the Diana Jones Award, which is a great thing. We go to dianajonesaward.org. We just released our list of our finalists for this year, and at Gen Con, we'll announce the winner. We're also going to have our emerging designer program winners there. So that should be fun. Those are young designers, or at least early in their career designers that we're bringing in. Which we do now that we are a 501c3 nonprofit, which I never thought I would hear myself say. So, this is our 25th year doing that, so that's been fun. And then we have the Minecraft Roll for Adventure, the first book in that, which I believe is called The Temple of the Charged Creeper. We went back and forth on titles quite a bit, but that is coming out on July 7th, and that's a neat little book where you actually have. It's meant for younger readers, not like 10 to 14-year-olds, whatever. But it's a choose your own adventure kind of thing, or a pick a path kind of thing, like the Endless Quest books I wrote. But then there are dice in it and a character sheet. It actually comes packaged with 4 6-sided dice, right? Like you open the book and there's a little pocket over here, and there's the dice in the pocket. You can put them back when you're done. There's another pocket in the back of the book that's got room for a character sheet and a map and a rule sheet, right? So you can refer to this stuff as you go along. And then the rest of the 212 pages, whatever it is, are story that you get to run through and mobs that you get to beat up and all that good stuff. So
Very cool.
and that's enough for now.
Wonderful.
There's always more stuff I can't talk about, right? So
Yeah. I will throw the links in so people can find this stuff and make sure that they check out the Diana Jones, the finalists. Very exciting. Very cool. All right, my friend. That is it. I'm going to push you out the door, but I like to give the guest the parting word of wisdom, the final word. Do you have anything for us as we head out the door?
Never trust somebody else's dice.
And that wraps up another episode of the Corner of Story and Game. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. Your insights into scaling story and mechanics is both inspiring and incredibly practical for creators of all types. And to you, dear listener, as always, thank you once again for taking your seat at the table. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, or head over to Discord and join in on the conversation. Until next time, keep telling stories, playing games, and creating worlds worth getting lost in. Stay safe out there, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in at the Corner of Story and Game.